What's the fallout from the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran? Hamas's political leader was assassinated as tension in the Middle East is running high. How much of a blow is this to Hamas and to Iran? And could Haniyeh's death escalate into a full regional conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. It's seen as a devastating blow against Hamas's leadership. The assassination of its political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran raises the prospect of an all-out war in the Middle East. Haniyeh was in the Iranian capital to attend the inauguration of President Masoud Pezeshkian. Hamas blames Israel for the attack. Israel has neither confirmed nor denied its involvement. And it came hours after an Israeli strike on the Lebanese capital Beirut that Israel says killed senior Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr. How will Hamas and Hezbollah respond? And what does all this mean for the war on Gaza and the risk of a broader regional conflict? We'll explore all these issues with our guests in a moment. But first, this report by Victoria Gatenby.
The assassination of Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Iran is likely to mark a dangerous development in the war on Gaza. Many fear the killing could spark a war in the Middle East. Hamas has blamed Israel for the attack. In a statement on its website, the Lebanese armed group said, "Brother, leader and martyr Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the movement, has been killed in a treacherous Zionist raid on his residence in Tehran after participating in the inauguration ceremony of the new Iranian president." Iran's supreme leader said because the attack took place on Iranian soil, it's the country's duty to avenge the death of Haniyeh. The assassination has been condemned by countries including Lebanon, Turkey, China and Russia, which called it an absolutely unacceptable political murder, which will lead to a further escalation of tensions. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said he believed further war in the Middle East was not inevitable, but reaffirmed US support for Israel.
If Israel is attacked, we certainly will help defend Israel. You saw us do that in April. You can expect to see us do that again. But we don't want to see any of that happen. We're going to work hard to make sure that we're doing things to help take the temperature down.
For many Palestinians, Haniyeh was a symbol of resistance in the face of Israeli occupation and adversity. He served briefly as Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. In Gaza, Palestinians said his death would help strengthen their resistance.
The martyrdom of the Mujahid Haniyeh is a great loss for the Arab and Muslim nation in general and for the Palestinian people in particular. Ismail Haniyeh was an excellent patriotic man. He performed his duty, delivered the message of the resistance and was up to his responsibilities.
It's very painful to hear the news of Ismail Haniyeh's martyrdom. The loss is great and his martyrdom broke our hearts. It was a big shock to Palestine.
Haniyeh's assassination came hours after an Israeli strike on the southern suburbs of the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Israel says senior Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr was killed. Both attacks risk escalating an already fragile situation in the region. The focus now turns to whether Iran and Hezbollah will retaliate against Israel and whether that could lead to a wider conflict. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go deeper into the significance of these assassinations for people in the region and beyond. Joining us from Istanbul today, although usually based in Tehran, we have Mohammad Marandi, who's a professor at the University of Tehran. And joining us from York in England is Sultan Barakat, a professor of public policy at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Doha. And from Beirut, Maha Yahya is the director of the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center. Welcome to Inside Story. Thanks for your time. Dr. Marandi, in Istanbul, the Iranian Supreme Leader has said on X that since the operation took place on Iranian soil, we see it as our duty to avenge his blood meaning Ismail Haniyeh's blood. What are Iran's options going forward?
Iran will definitely strike hard at the Israelis. If you recall, I'm sure you recall when the Israeli regime bombed the Iranian consulate building in Syria, Iran took its complaint to the UN Security Council, and to the shock of the international community, the United States, Germany, France, and the UK, they oppose the condemnation of the Israeli regime. In other words, they supported its bombing of a diplomatic building. So it was clear to the Iranians that the only way to make sure that the Israeli regime does not continue carrying out such outrageous attacks is to strike at it. This time around, I think it's going to be more severe because Ismail Haniyeh is very dear to leaders and influential people in the Iranian political establishment. He's a household name. He's considered by Iranians to be a hero in the resistance. He's leading the fight. He's helping lead the fight against a regime that's carrying out genocide, that soldiers are raping prisoners, and who day and night we're seeing the deaths of children. So I think both because of the issue of sovereignty and also because he is seen as a martyr and the hero, the Iranians will strike the Israeli regime very hard.
But Mr. Marandi, is there a risk then this drags Iran into a wider regional conflict, something that Iran has always said in the past that it does not want? I mean, Netanyahu, some people will say, well, that's his agenda all along, and if Iran does retaliate, then Netanyahu will succeed.
No one wants escalation except for the Israeli regime. That's true for Hezbollah, that's true for Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Ansarullah, or the Houthis, as they say. It's true for the resistance in Iraq and Syria, and it's true for Iran. But the regime is carrying out genocide. Hezbollah, it has to draw away forces from Gaza to prevent them from decimating the population, because the West will enable them to do so. We've seen it for 10 months now. Ansarullah has to block the Red Sea. They've said themselves that they are implementing the Genocide Convention. The Americans are trying to help the Israelis carry out genocide, and they're fighting against Ansarullah. But what are the options? What is the option for Iran but to defend the people of Gaza? So if Iran does not strike the Israeli regime, it's going to only get worse. Netanyahu will become more aggressive. But I think that the reality is that the Israeli regime has already lost the war. They've lost on the border with Lebanon. They've lost in Gaza. True, they're carrying out genocide, but even that is hurting the Israeli regime more than anyone else in the world. The regime is despised across the global South, even in the West, despite Western media and despite governments and despite what diplomats are trying to do.
Right.
People are turning against the regime. So the longer the war lasts and the more they escalate, it's worse for Israel. It may be beneficial for Netanyahu, but it doesn't benefit Israel. But no one wants escalation. But at the same time, the regime has to stop carrying out the genocide.
Maha, Yahya in Beirut, what do you make of what happened and the timing of this assassination, and also where it took place in Tehran?
Good afternoon. I think the timing, both the timing and the location, are a significant escalation in a context that's already aflame. The fact that Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran, now we're understanding it was at the presidential palace. The story we're hearing is that he was killed with a missile that directly targeted him, so they knew exactly which room he was in. That tells you a number of things. One is there's definitely a breach in the security, a significant breach in the security. The messaging to Tehran and to allies, the different allies around the world, is we can get you anywhere. But it also says, there's no ceasefire. At the end of the day, Ismail Haniyeh was the key person who was negotiating via Qatar and others the ceasefire with Israel in Gaza. And by taking him out, they've effectively said no to the deal in a way.
So what do you think this actually means for the ceasefire?
The question is, will this now be used, particularly when you combine the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran with the killing of Fuad Shukr in Lebanon, in Beirut? Will this now be used as an off-ramp to try and de-escalate things and push even further for a ceasefire? And when I say push, I mean pressure Israel into a ceasefire today, because that is the key to de-escalating across the region? Or is this going to be used to inflame things further? Netanyahu is basically dragging the US into a regional confrontation with Iran. I think if things continue the way they are, he is definitely dragging the US into a conflict with Iran. And at the US today, we have an administration that is more or less a lame duck administration at this point. You have a president who has had to withdraw from the presidential race, a presidential nominee who's not yet the candidate, but will probably be the candidate, but who is running for election. And the last thing they need is a war on their hands.
Okay, hang on a second, Maha. So let me just put these comments to you. Speaking of the U.S., the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said that the Biden administration was not warned of the attack against the Hamas political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, ahead of time, nor did it have any part in it. Blinken was quite quick to make the statement. Why do you think he did so? And do you think that the Americans would have given the Israelis the green light to conduct this assassination?
I doubt it, honestly. I think this assassination is similar to what happened in when Israel targeted the Iranian embassy in Damascus. It was done without a U.S. green light, and it absolutely infuriated the administration. I suspect it's the same scenario here. They were notified of that of the attempt in Beirut, that they were going to target Fuad Shukr in Beirut. Most likely they gave the go-ahead for that, particularly because Fuad Shukr is wanted by the U.S. administration in connection with the Marine barracks bombing of 1983. So, but, I doubt that they would have given a green light for the targeting of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in particular.
Okay, let's ask Mohammad Marandi if you share that assessment, Dr. Marandi, because the timing of this seems interesting. It comes shortly after Netanyahu returned from the U.S. I mean, would Israel have been assured in the U.S. through any of the meetings that Netanyahu held that there would be no repercussions for any action that Israel takes going forward?
Well, first I must point out that the attack did not take place in the presidential palace. It was at a guest house. But I don't think that the United States wants an escalation. I think that that's quite clear. I think that's true both for Trump and for Biden and for Harris. But I think Netanyahu probably does want an escalation. And Netanyahu is going to get U.S. support no matter what it does. The United States may not have been informed about the attack on the consulate or the attack on the guest house with Mr. Ismail Haniyeh in it, but they definitely provided the intelligence. The Israelis get their intelligence from Western governments. They get them from Western embassies in Iran. They get them from embassies Western embassies in countries around Iran. And of course, the NSA, other agencies that belong to the United States and its key allies, they're all used, their intelligence is used by the Israelis, even as they carry out the genocide in Gaza, they're using that information. But the Americans definitely don't want an escalation because an escalation would mean the destruction of the global economy. American bases in the Persian Gulf region, in Iraq, they would all be destroyed. And those countries that host those bases, their key infrastructure would be destroyed. That would mean that the gas and oil would no longer be exported from the region. That would create a collapse everywhere. No one wants that. But Netanyahu is the only person, along with maybe a few people in Israel, who do need an escalation because they need to push this war forward because of their own interests. But Israel, it's not in the interest of Israel. Israel has been diminished. Its economy has been devastated. No one in the future is going to invest in Israel. And people, as they see this genocide continue, their hatred for Israel becomes more entrenched, not just in our region, but across the globe. So the further this war continues, whether it expands or not, it's going to be worse for Israel. If it expands, Israel will again lose, but Netanyahu wins. And so the interests of the Israeli regime are not necessarily the interests of the current people sitting around the cabinet table in Tel Aviv or in Quds.
So, Sultan, I mean, what strategic purpose do you think this assassination serves Israel?
In the immediate term, it may look to some as if Israel got its way and has killed yet another Hamas leader. But history tells us that this doesn't actually end Hamas. And if you recall, 20 years ago, they killed Ahmad Yassin. 20 years later, they had 7 of October. So it's not going to resolve their problem at all. But in terms of the negotiations, it has really announced an end to any possibilities of negotiated settlement over this issue. Particularly, I think it will put at a huge risk the return of the captives who are held by Hamas. Effectively, Netanyahu has killed his counterpart in the negotiations. Ismail Haniyeh, as the head of the political office, he would have acted in an equivalent capacity to Netanyahu in taking decisions. And he is known as someone who's very pragmatic and on the moderate side of the equation all the time within Hamas politics. So taking him out, having also killed his deputy Saleh al-Aruri back in January, doesn't really help Israel have any political counterpart to negotiate with.
What does this mean, Sultan Barakat, for the military leaders? What does this mean then for the military leaders on the ground in Gaza, like Yahya Sinwar, for example, and the kind of decisions that he and others might be taking now that Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated?
I think by default now the leadership will go back into Gaza, to those in Gaza, and Sinwar will be the person who can decide without any counterweight to his position on any of the issues. And until a new leader is elected by Hamas's now, this is unlikely to happen very quickly given the circumstances. There are very difficult communication channels between Hamas factions and individuals and so on, given the war on the ground. So Sinwar will probably be leading the scene from now onwards. And as such, his priorities are going to be dictated by the facts that he faces in Gaza day in, day out.
Maha, Yahya, of course, we mentioned this earlier on, but there was another attack that took place hours before the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, and that was in the Doha in Beirut. The target of that attack was, of course, a Hezbollah member, Fuad Shukr. Do you expect a forceful Hezbollah response to that attack? I mean, what choices does Hezbollah face right now?
I think Hezbollah is caught between a rock and a hard place to a certain extent. On the one hand, they've declared that they will not stop bombing until, the fight will continue and the pressure on Israel's northern front, Lebanon's southern front will continue until there's a ceasefire in Gaza, which means they're now held hostage to that ceasefire to a certain extent. So they're now caught really between a rock and a hard place because they do not want to war, and they've signaled, and I believe Iran does not want to war either. They've signaled this repeatedly since October 8th when the conflict started. But at the same time, they have to respond in some way or another. So I think they're looking at options through which they can respond, but respond in a more measured way, one that would not lead to an all-out escalation in Lebanon. At the same time, I think this would have been a bit easier before the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. Now with the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, that kind of strategic calculus has become a lot more difficult. They'll be coordinating very closely with Tehran to see what kind of appropriate response is possible. one that would send a signal, but would not trigger a kind of an all-out conflict between Lebanon and Israel.
Since you speak to us from Beirut, just give us a sense of what it's like in Beirut now after the assassination of Fuad Shukr and, of course, Ismail Haniyeh. What are people thinking?
Everyone's very anxious. They're very worried. There's a lot of cynicism around Israel's response. The idea that they're using the tragic bombing of Majd al-Shams in occupied territories, predominantly Arab village where its inhabitants have refused Israeli citizenship, so that they're using the tragic killing of 12 children in a horrific way in order to score goals, if you like, and achieve things that they've been wanting to do for quite some time. So there's a lot of cynicism around that, but there's also a lot of anxiety. Don't forget, Lebanon has already dealt with Israeli invasions, 1978, 1982, 1993, 1996, and 2006.
Right.
So this is not the first round between the two countries. There's a lot of fear. A lot of people who had come to spend the summer with their families are leaving now. Embassies are calling on their citizens to leave, for their foreign nationals. So there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear, and we're all holding our breath and waiting to see what's next.
Dr. Marandi, the Kataib Hezbollah group of Iraq has said that the Israeli killing of Hamas leader Haniyeh in Tehran, quote, broke all rules of engagement. That was on a statement on an official Telegram channel. So do you think that going forward, I mean, the groups, the Iranian allies in the region, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, will they be coordinating a response altogether to both killings of both men?
Well, one thing that we should remember is that immediately after the bombing of Beirut, of a residential building, the Americans bombed the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, killing a number of people, including a senior commander. And then Ismail Haniyeh was martyred in Iran. So all of these are linked together, and American actions and Israeli actions are coordinated. Maybe, the Americans did not know that the martyr Ismail Haniyeh was going to be killed, but in general, they give intelligence and they do work together against this axis of resistance. But I think that, yes, there will be an escalation on behalf of the collective axis, whether it's Iran or Iraq or Yemen or Lebanon, because the Israeli regime under Netanyahu is escalating, and there's no other way to deal with Netanyahu and the regime. If you back down, they're going to escalate, and they're going to take advantage. They'll see that as a sign of weakness. So the regime has to be pushed back. What is important is that the United States has to come to the recognition that an escalation would not be to its benefit. Not only is the United States and Europe being seen as completely complicit in this genocide, not only are they very much, every single diplomat, every single mainstream Western journals, all politicians in the West, not only are they all complicit in this horrific genocide, but they are losing their credibility across the globe. Never for the next few decades will they be able to criticize Russia or China or anyone else for human rights or for anything after what they did. This is the first televised genocide in human history. So the cost for the United States and Europe is immense, especially at a time when they are in Ukraine, they're on the back foot, things are getting worse, and of course their tensions with China are on the rise too.
Okay, let me bring in Sultan Barakat. Do you expect a coordinated response on behalf of the axis of resistance groups, as they're known in the region, going forward?
I think the idea of a deterrence, that Israel will be stopped from attacking Iran or anywhere else because of fear of retaliation, has really disappeared back in April. The way Iran retaliated to the assassination of its own commander in Damascus, has really given Israel the green light, despite what others may interpret it like and say this was calculated just to give a signal and so on. It has strengthened Israelis' hand. It also, the visit by Netanyahu to United States and his conduct in the Congress has practically emboldened him to go further. He sees himself very much as the kingmaker in the United States elections now, between now and November, and both parties will never object to him taking any decision that he interprets as a decision for the security of Israel. And you can see this by the fact that he has taken he has approved an operation in Tehran. I mean, if you are fearing Iran, the last place you want to assassinate anyone, never mind Haniyeh, anybody on an Iranian soil. But he has, regardless of all of these threats, he went ahead with this. He knows that the United States will come to his rescue. He knows that everyone does not want escalation in the area, and that everybody will be working twice as hard to try and climb down from this position.
Speaking of working twice as hard, final word to Maha, Yahya in Beirut. Diplomatically, what do you think is going on right now behind the scenes in world capitals? Because presumably leaders want to defuse the situation.
I think there's a lot of back channels that are working overtime now to try and contain the situation, to convince probably Iran to either not respond or to mute its response, similar to what happened in April. Also to try and work with Hezbollah in terms of what can be done to decrease the tension and the prospect of an all-out conflict with Lebanon, one that Lebanon can ill afford, quite honestly. So I think actually the region can ill afford, not just Lebanon. So I think there is a lot of pressure right now on all fronts to try and bring things down, bring the heat down a little bit.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, Mohammad, Marandi, Sultan, Barakat, and Maha, Yahya. We thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Join the conversation on X. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.